We'll get you up for halftime.
All right.
Wait. I'm so kidding.
Okay. And we are live on the YouTube. So welcome everyone to the launch of My Government Means to Kill Me by Rasheed Newson. And we are also joined by Jelani Alladin, who did the audiobook. So welcome to the Bureau of General Services Queer Division. My name is Greg Newton. I am the co-founder, along with my partner, Donnie Jokum, of the Bureau of General Services Queer Division. And the short explanation for our lengthy name is that we are a government agency for a government that does not yet exist, but we hope will come into being at some point. We are an all-volunteer organization. We have Hannon Recking, who's helping us out today, and a bunch of other volunteers who help us to staff the space. We're open Wednesdays through Sundays from 1 to 7. So we survive by, in this hostile world, by selling books and taking donations. So we have a suggested donation of $10. I'm going to pass this around. But if you're planning on buying a book, hold on to your money. You can use that money to buy a book.
Can they donate at home too?
They can donate at home too. You can Venmo us. Thank you. At BGSQD, the letters are all around you. So we very much appreciate that. And there's change in the bag if you like. What else do I need to say? We have an email list if you'd like to sign up for that. We send out an email every other Monday about our upcoming events, and we have quite a few. So please check that out. You can sign up for that at the back or on our website. And before I introduce our guest today, I wanted to read a brief land acknowledgement. So the Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We are actively seeking to partner with and provide material support to a local queer Indigenous organization. And we hope to make an announcement about this partnership in the near future. But in the meantime, we encourage you to join the Bureau in signing up to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community House's Mannahatta Fund. So the Mannahatta Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-Native people who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. So you can find out more about that at mannahattafund.org. All right, let's get into it. Rasheed Newson is a writer and producer of Bel Air, The Chi, and Narcos. He currently resides in Pasadena, California with his husband and 2 children. My Government Means to Kill Me is his debut novel. And Jelani Alladin originated the role of Kristoff in the Frozen musical and narrated the audiobook of My Government Means to Kill Me. Please give them a very warm welcome.
Good afternoon. First, I just want to thank all of you for being here. I'd like to thank the Bureau for hosting us. It means a lot that you came out today. I realize that it's Super Bowl Sunday. I know that means a lot to them. Yeah. And so thank you for choosing to be here. I'm really also excited about this event because, I mean, Jelani and I now, we have this bond where you narrated this book, but this is the first time we've met.
First time. It's happening live right now.
And normally these book events, I get asked all the questions, which means I've got to come up with all the answers, but not today.
Oh, wow.
So I get to ask you questions. And the first one is, I just want to talk about what it's like. I mean, there are a lot of moments as a writer that you think about. You think about when you sell the book, you think about when they send you the hardcover and you open up the box. The one I hadn't anticipated is where they're like, oh, here's the file for your audiobook. And you've got to listen and just sort of see what happened. And there's no retake. There's no chances to do anything about it. And you go in there and I listen to it and I fell in love with your version of this book.
Thank you.
I wrote this book. There were places that you made it funny where I hadn't expected that. You made it sexier in parts. You made it tender in parts I hadn't thought about. And that's really just, it's a testament to your talent, but it provided the book, it made the book a new experience for me. And at that point, I've been living with it for years. And I know from other people who read it, what I'm really marveling at is people who will listen to it, they think it's a memoir. They think you're really Trey, and this is like a thing you're doing. And like people were like, oh my God, I got to the end, and I'm like, this is a novel.
So we're going to submit this for a Grammy, is what you're saying?
So my first question for you is just, I don't think people realize what goes into recording an audiobook. You did not just sit down one afternoon and read this. Can you tell us about the prep and the hours and the work?
Do you want me to read from the book first? Or
That's right. We're supposed to do that, aren't we?
Well, I'll let you float.
No. First, you're going to read from the book, and then we'll go into questions.
Yeah, we'll give the people some proof.
Give them a text.
You talk all that talk, but like, can we do it? So just to give you, I guess, a summary for those who haven't read the book, this is going to be a huge spoiler. Those of you at home who haven't read it, you should get your copy. Look at this beautiful cover. At this point in the story, Trey has moved to New York City. He has been through some tumultuous love escapades, and he and his roommate have decided to not pay rent to their apartment. They then go on this long journey to try to do a kind of housing rent strike, and they end up winning this strike against Fred Trump. And Trey has now returned to his apartment building to kind of celebrate his victories. And, well, let's start reading. Robbed of my gratification, I decided to head to Mount Morris. Marcel would be starting his shift soon, and he'd get a kick out of what I'd done. Old Rustin might be at the bathhouse too, and I deserved to have him beam at me with pride. High praise, followed by anonymous sex, was the 1-2 combination to salvage my flagging mood. I took the stairs down to the lobby. The elevator opened, but I didn't look back to see who was stepping out of it. I kept my head down and braced myself for the cold winds that would greet me outside. In short, I was minding my own fucking business. Trey, can I talk to you? I recognized the voice, and I wondered if I could get away with pretending I hadn't heard her. Yes, I thought, just keep walking. But she wasn't going to let me escape. She rushed across the wet floor to catch up with me. Trey! I turned around. Good evening, Brianna. Can I give you some advice? She asked. Never in my life had the previous question ever led to a productive conversation. Guided by etiquette and a faint hope that I could let whatever Brianna was going to say go in one ear and right out the other, I answered, yes, by all means. You're making a fool of yourself, she said. I clenched my teeth, trapping my tongue inside my mouth. The way you preen and swish, she continued, the puppy dog looks you gave Harrison, gay boys like you, the pretty ones, can't help but come sniffing around him. My tongue shoved against the back of my teeth, crying out for freedom. He's too big-hearted to tell you to stop or to punch your lights out. Brianna spoke these vile words with the assured tone of a Sunday school teacher warning her students against mortal sin. He says, so what if this fairy's got a crush on me? Let it be known that I walked away. Through the front entrance and down the chip stairs and onto the sidewalk. I did my level best to keep from going off on Brianna. She pursued me. She wouldn't let it go. I told him it's not right to let you go on embarrassing yourself. Put the sissy out of his misery. Pedestrians had stopped to watch Brianna hector me. Her voice was echoing off the buildings. My mind latched onto her last insult and flipped. Put the sissy out of his misery? No, put this bitch out of her misery. I spun around and charged toward Brianna. He sucked my cock first in your apartment while you were at work one night. I got nose to nose with her. I came in his mouth and he spit it out onto your dish towel. He's a real man. Keep saying that. Maybe one day you'll believe it. She and I were shouting one on top of another. You stay away from us. You want to scare me off? Because you know your man can't be had. Never. Never. Not in your wildest dreams. But you're too late. I've had him. And I've had better. You're sick and twisted. He likes his balls tugged while I blow him. He said, you do it that way too. That shut her down. Mouth agape, eyes wide open, she froze. No sound from her, not even breathing. The people who gawked in our screaming match clapped, whistled, and laughed. They shouted their thoughts on who had won, and according to the voice vote, it was I. Then, after several seconds, Brianna rolled her shoulders back and stood perfectly straight. I expected her to haul off and slap me, but she retreated to 22 Mercer with her head held high. She walked as if nothing unseemly had occurred. I wasn't so composed. There was a lurching ache in my stomach, and I wanted to vomit, but couldn't. Strangers were smiling at me and complimenting me on how I torn Brianna to shreds. Their wicked approval only compounded my sense of despair. Acting like a snide, shrieking gay minstrel was not how I wanted to be seen or applauded. Hurting people, even clueless, hateful homophobes, also did nothing for my self-esteem. Instead of going to Mount Morris, I walked into a bar on Christopher Street and got drunk alone while I did some tall thinking. No epiphanies joined me at the bar that night, and it would take years for me to understand why I had been unable to enjoy the spoils of victory. Winning rarely changes how people perceive us and almost never soothes our insecurities. Winning, as some of us conceive it, is external and public. I didn't yet know that the most rewarding activities of my life would be those done in secret.
I've had to do readings as you go on book tour. It never sounds that good. It never sounds that good when I do it. And can you talk to us about like taking on a book where you've got to bring every character to life. You've got to be everybody in the play, so to speak.
That's correct.
How did you approach that? How did you break it down? What does it take?
Yeah, so I don't know if any of you know what the audition process for an audiobook is. You get an excerpt from the book and you just record that. I was in a closet in my apartment, and you don't get to read the whole book before you audition. You don't really get to know many details of what's going on. I didn't see a manuscript until way later. And so you go off of instinct, you go off of first impulse. And there was something about when I first read the excerpt, I think it was from the first lesson of your book. I said, okay, there are so many choices that could be made here, right? You've written a character that for some reason could be seen as so quote unquote stereotypical.
Yeah.
If you were to write it off, you'd be like this flaming fairy black queen. That's Trey, right? Yeah. But he's so much more. And so even from that excerpt, I was able to say, oh my God, this person is thinking so deeply. This character is analyzing himself so clearly. He's shrewd, he's smart, he's cunning, he's also strong. And so I wanted to find a balance in creating the voice for that. And so I pulled a lot of my influences for Trey from a character I played in real life, Ferris, in Choir Boy by Terrell Allen Craney. I played Ferris twice in my life. And so I was like, oh, I feel a similar kind of tone here in this person. And so you go through, you read it, you record it, you send it off, and you hope somebody says, yeah, you got the gig, kid. And then when I actually read the book, what I do is I love to read it once, just to be like, all right, what is this book? I read it once, I was marveled.
But wait, is it too late at that point to say no?
What?
Like if you read the whole book, can you go, oh, actually, just kidding?
No, because you already agreed to the job. I don't like to back down from things I already agreed to. Rarely does that happen, and when it does, I feel horrible. But no, you commit. And I think there was an energy of I wanted to do this, because never had I read a book like this, never had I experienced a story like this. And so I go through, I read, I'm like, okay, what's the age of the character? What is his education background? And Trey has a very specific background. Trey is, comes from a upper middle class Black family in Indiana, and then he travels to New York City. So there is a kind of a poise about the way he speaks that I was trying to capture. And then you have to understand there's the character voice and there's a narrator voice. And the narrator is this older version of Trey, right? This he's recalling these events that are happening. So Trey can be here, but the narrator has to be here, right? And so you have to find the ease that goes in and out of those transitions. And I learned that from working on my first book, which is written by Aaron Foley here with us today, Boys Come First, Boys Come First. And in recording that with a great director, Jonice Abbott, she really taught me like how to distinguish narrator voice from character voice. And I think that was really the thing that latched me into this project, is that you had such a clear distinction of when Trey was narrating and when Trey was inside the action. And then also, because I'm just like, so I treat it like a play, right? That's where my background comes from. I come from a background in theater, I'm an actor. And so this is my script. Every word has to have importance and life and juice built into it, every word. And it just so happens you have an author who's writing every word brilliantly. Also, my vocabulary expanded like 10 times. I was like, what is this word? I've never seen this before. Let me Google. In the recording session, I'd be like, can we just find someone saying the name of the word? I've never heard this before. What does it mean? I mean, like there were times I had to stop and like literally like use a dictionary. So thank you. Now more on that might be a thing. So yeah, so that's the approach. The approach is read once, read second time from the perspective of the character. And also while I was recording your audiobook, I would go home every night and prepare the next 3 lessons that I would record, because there is so much specificity inside of the story that I was like, don't fuck it up, Jay. Don't go in there. Don't be lazy tonight. You could go out with your friends and have a drink where you could look at these lessons and make sure you really understand what's happening, because it is a memoir. So you have to feel like this person owns it. That I have to feel like I owned your story.
I think you did.
I tried to be determined by the audience.
But like, it's all, I mean, like, how many days, how many hours is this? Like,
Yeah, this is a whole week, only 1 week, and I only had. Oh wait, no! Recording your book, I got sick in the middle of it. I got like maybe COVID. I don't know. Who knows these days? Yeah. You like start sniffling your cough and it's like something RSV, whatever the hell's called. It's crazy. But so I got sick in the middle, so I was recording it for supposed to be 1 week. Then the engineer who was recording it also got sick. So then we had to split it up. So I did, I think, lesson 1 through 8. And then I had to wait a month and a half before continuing the rest.
Nobody told me this.
Oh my God.
You're good.
That was difficult to wait, because you're like, this is already bubbling inside me. And it's specifically lesson 8, what this excerpt was just from. 8 is where you see a huge transition in the character. And 9 is where he begins the journey of becoming, the activist. And so I was like so amped and ready to like go on this journey, and then boom, sickness cut off. So then it was like I had to come back, and actually I listened to my own chapter. I listened to me doing a chapter to get back into the tone of voice that I had already created. And finding those characters, because sometimes, your writers like to write characters that show up in the first line of the piece, and then they come in later in the piece, and you're like, what did I do on the first line? That's the decision I made. Trey's mom shows up, I think, in the first 4 words of the first 4 paragraphs. And then she has this huge, beautiful scene at the end. And I'm like, what did I decide? Can we go? Did we mark that? And the engineer's like, we didn't mark it. I was like, oh. So then we have to go back and find that voice.
I love it.
It's a process. It's a cool process. And this is the only thing you have. For many nights, I'd go home and I couldn't stop hearing my voice in my ear, because you're listening to yourself on your phone, talking all day. And you take them off, I can still hear Jelani Alladin sparking my voice.
As you're going through that book before you start, where there are characters or sections, what I love about actors, like, you all know when you're going to kill something. You're like, give me this, and I know. Were there sections where you're like, I can't wait to like sink my teeth into this, or characters you were I can't wait to play?
I loved Gregory. I think he was calling me. I was like, yeah, I can play him. We ever did a live version. I loved him, particularly I loved the scene with him and Trey when they walk home, wasted, and Gregory explains why he's become who he's become. There was a vulnerability to that. There's a vulnerability to a lot of your scenes that you've written with these characters. And for me, that one was really fun to strip away the stereotypical essences of these characters and fall deep into the core of what they're made of. In that one scene, I was able to feel that. I was like, bang, got this. A lot of the intense dramatic scenes of the book, I felt very secure in. A lot of the sex scenes of the book, I felt very secure in. I think I had never experienced, between Aaron's book and your book, I had never experienced such explicit, clear, detailed description of queer sex.
It's a new age. Yeah.
But it was so I was able to personalize all of that so deeply. And I think that that really was a really fun thing to dive into, to be like, all right, yeah, now we get to like put on the sexy voice and go through that. I'm trying to think of other things that I took some notes here. Hold on, maybe. Gotta check the notes.
Okay, I want to say something just to jump off something you said, to your credit. There is a lot of vulnerability. I think when you listen to it, you can hear that the vulnerability. I would credit you with actually infusing that into it. I'm a polite person, but I'm not actually a nice person. There's a distinction. I have great manners. Manners, right? And so, but what you turned into sort of vulnerability, I would just have been like, to me, if I delivered it, it would just be dry honesty. I would be like, well, this is where I'm coming from. And you added a tenderness to it that I think is really appealing and very wonderful. But you did that. But that's what I think is interesting. You saw the text and you saw something there that I hadn't maybe even put there. And that's what's wonderful about that writer-actor relationship, is that you guys, I really do love when we're on set. My day job is television.
Day job. Love that.
And I would never give an actor a line reading. The most I'll say to somebody, well, how do you want me to play this? I might say, surprise me. Like, that's all I really would like. And I feel like you brought a lot of humanity to this in a way that I'm not really actually, capable of.
Well, you wrote it. I just started. They just told me to show up at the studio at this time. Yes, sir, I'll be there. I think there's also something to be said about the contradictions within the characters that you've written that allow the space for mystery, for discovery, when you read it, when you experience it. So I'm sure that everyone, if you've read the book probably and not listened to the audiobook, you're also creating your own movie in your mind about what this book is, how it feels, who these people are, what the Mount Morris bathhouse looks like. Like, quite literally all those images, I could close my eyes and feel, taste, see the movie. The movie in my mind kept guiding me, particularly when we talk about the mixing of fiction and historical figures, right? So one of the most fun parts, I think, that I got to do with this book was create Bayard Rustin, or Jelani Alladin's version of Bayard Rustin, right? We've all watched Selma. We've all watched there's so much footage of the civil rights movement, yet there's not much about Bayard Rustin. There's a whole movie coming out this year called Rustin on Netflix. But I personally wanted to make sure Rustin filled that familiar, speaking of Black History Month, filled that familiar tone that we associate Black History Month with, right? We're all taught in school, these are the figures, these are the things. And we actually have created voices for them in our head, even though we don't know that. We actually have created voices for Martin Luther King, even though we know what his voice sounds like, Malcolm X, we've created that for ourselves. And so for Bayard, I was like, what is my sound of like an older man who's been through it and weathered? And for me, the Southern came to mind, right? There's something about hearing a Southern drag when someone talks like this that you feel like they've done something, they've accomplished something. And so I wanted to bring that tone and color into Byron. And so creating that was also a joy. You know, so there's so, and then Angie, if you've read the book, you know Angie, that was this broad, strong woman. But we've all have a voice made up in our head what a lesbian sounds like. Let's be real. We all have this idea of what a
We central casting.
yeah.
Like, this is what fits this slot.
Yeah, exactly. And so you start with that building block, and then you bring it to something that's complexly written, and you're able to crack it open and be like, oh, well, there is that stereotypical thing where she is hard with Trey, but then there's the moment where she breaks down in the hallway. And so what does that sound like? How did you then get inside of a new part of the stereotype that's unknown? And that for me was the joy of bringing your book to life.
I wanted to ask you about the historical characters because I'm assuming this might be something where we had a similarity, because in writing the book, there's a lot of audio footage, video footage of these people. And it was this process of sort of listening to enough that I felt comfortable writing it, but also throwing it away because it's them and not them.
That's right.
And you have to sort of make it your own at a point. And I mean, so did you end up outside of the book and source material, did you listen to any of these people as a guide, or did you not want that to interfere?
I did not want that to interfere. I think there were some specific people, when you write that someone's making an impersonation of someone, I went and listened to. So I remember there was a Maria Callas impersonation at some point. There was a couple of other things that
Marlene Dietrich.
Yeah. And so I literally went and looked up these people because I was like, well, that is a specific reference that like you literally want this person to sound like this person. And so the character knows what that person sounds like. So I have to know what that person sounds like too. But for most of the historical figures, I kind of like let it go. And what's going to feed this story that you've created here and now? And rather than to be like, well, the accurate way to speak like this person is this thing, but that doesn't help what I'm trying to accomplish. Then, for example, Fred Trump. Yeah. There was a dominance that I wanted to bring to that character, an imposing figure that, you know, the Trumps, sometimes if you just listen to them, they sound ridiculous.
Yeah.
So it is what it, like apart from politics, like if you just actually just hear their voice, like it sounds a little cartoonish, right? And I thought that cannot be the way that we portray this character, but this has to be a threat to Trey. So then I have to disassociate from the real thing and create the thing that's going to be service the story of the book. And that was really fun to do. And
this next question, I'm asking only because I would ask it while I was writing the book. And again, in television, every PA is like straight out of college. And I would say, just as what do you know about Larry Kramer? And they would know, you know, he was an activist, but that was it. Like they couldn't actually go beyond that. They couldn't tell you anything about his personality. He had a big personality. They don't know that. So I'm wondering, in terms of the players and the history, how much of this was new to you? How much you know?
So much was new to me. The back half of the book, and this is why I feel like I kept on, I don't know if anyone here reads my tweets, but I kept on saying this book should be read in schools because it's so highly educational for me in terms of understanding queer history. I'm like, wait a minute, I missed this chapter. I completely don't have this. We don't have this chapter.
You didn't miss it. They kept it from.
They kept it from.
You know, you weren't late to school one day.
I was never late.
They took it out of the curriculum. They're taking it out of the curriculum now. So that's an intentional choice.
And that's to their fault.
Yeah,
that's to humanity's fault. Because in those history lessons, that's where we learn how to be better humans with each other. And in fact, that's actually what Trey goes through, right? He learns how to be a better human to society through the act of experience.
Well, the thing with history, history is a collection of stories. And the reason why, heaven forbid, you should find out that you might be the hero in a story. Because then you could go on and be a hero in your life. And we don't actually want that. We'd like you to stay small. We'd like you to think of yourself in a small way. Heroes, that's heroism. That's big. That's not for you. And so we don't give you any examples of it. So, but that is that's a policy choice.
Wow. Well, we have to go and correct that. We're going to correct that. We have to correct that. So that for me, I learned a lot. I'm continuing to still learn. It actually happened to be a whole year of historical fiction for me personally, 2022, because I went on to do Fellow Travelers right after I recorded this book. and that is also historical fiction. It's going to be a limited series on Paramount Plus with Showtime.
I love that.
Call out. Thank you.
Yeah.
Rolls off my tongue so easily. And it explores these queer men who are living the struggles of loving themselves and loving other people during the McCarthy era in the 1950s. And you follow their romances all the way through to the 1980s, kind of landing where Trey is. So it was just a full year of me learning so much more about queer history so fast. It was a crash course.
Another question I have is about, as you're going through the book and you're looking at it, were there sections that gave you any trepidation? Were there sections where you thought, oh my God, anything
Oh my God.
scare you?
Yes, lesson, what number is it? I think it's number 13. Is it 13 and 14? So once Trey decides that he's going, Peter drags Trey to the unofficial ACT UP meeting.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
That whole sequence from then on through where Larry gives the big speech at the actual center was so challenging. When you have 5+ characters in a room arguing with each other and debating things, there were times where I'd be like, stop. Wait, what does this character sound like? Who's this person? Oh God, okay, wait. If you went back to listen to the raw video, audio clips of that whole section, you'd be like, this guy is nuts. What is he going through? I mean, there were times I would stop and just scream. I'd be like, okay, I'm ready. It was really challenging because there's rhythm also. You write in a rhythm. And so you wanted to never lose that momentum, but you wanted to give each person their full worth because it's like, you've already committed to all the other characters in the book. You can't get lazy now. And so that was very, very challenging for me. I find different voices, different tones, to make sure that the listener can track it. If you had nothing but the voice, can you understand what I'm saying and doing?
I'm going to apologize, but probably not change my behavior, which is something I like doing. Because what's interesting is I never thought of that for the audiobook. Like, what was nice about writing a book versus television is there are no restraints in writing a book, right? Like in television, I've got to keep this thing on our stages for so many days.
You can't have this. You only have this many guest stars, co-stars. Yeah.
And typically, I try to avoid like 5 people in a TV scene because that's a long day for me. That's right. Murder on the crew. Nobody wants that. Right. But you're writing your book at home. You're like, you got your boyfriend. This I'm realizing like, oh yeah, somebody's got to be in a sound booth, actually sorting this out,
right? And tracking it.
I'm so sorry.
I loved it. Look, it was hard, but just because something's hard, I'm not going to not do it. You know what I mean? I think it was a great challenge, and it was a great stretch of my abilities. Even I listened to the audiobook for the first time last week. I was texting.
Really? That's the first time you were listening to it? So wait, are you not somebody like if you don't watch yourself or you don't?
Oh, I like to watch myself. But I did not listen because it was so many hours that I didn't have. Like when I'm shooting a TV show, I like to not expose myself to any other media because I don't want to be influenced by anything. Like you see a good movie while you're shooting a movie, you're like, oh, I should be acting like Kate Blanchett and Tar. That's how I should be acting. And then you start influencing your performance based on that, and that's weird. So I like to be like, no, I'm not. So the audiobook came out in August, in the middle of shooting.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I don't have the time. I don't want to get into my head about anything. So finally last week, preparing for this, I was like, I must listen to it. Like, if we're going to talk about it, I got to listen to it. So that was my first experience. And it was wonderful to listen because I was like proud of that. I was proud of all of it.
You're really good. Have you heard feedback? Like, had people told you, like other people who read it? Because I'm hearing everything. My favorite is when people assume I read it and they tell me I did a great job.
Yes, thank you.
Have you heard any of the feedback?
I've heard only through you, only through what you share on Instagram and Twitter is what I see and read. But I think, in listening back, I heard so many more nuances that I forgot I even created. Like listening back to the final lesson completely broke my heart. Listening back to the exchange between Trey and his mother, even now brings me to an emotional place of this idea of this person going into this world. You have this tragic event that has separated you two. This man ran away from his family. She comes as a olive branch almost of sorts, and he refuses to take it. And going through that ride and that experience of what each of them, I wanted to make sure that in each argument in this book, every character is right. Every character is correct. There is no, until we get back to Trey's narration, we should feel no influence that we're only listening to Trey's version of this. It should be like, no, I'm actually inside the mother's head and her thoughts and how she's thinking, how she's justifying this. That was important to me. And so listening back to that completely wrecked me. And there's I remember recording that in the booth, and there were times I'd stop and just cry and then be like, all right, I'm ready to go again. Because it was so raw. I mean, it's just the way that you wrote, the way that you write people holding tension in their throat was very interesting to me. I never actually, even the excerpt that I read today, like my tongue clenched, my tongue was held against my teeth. Like you actually write tension into how these people are communicating with each other. And so it was my job to get inside that. I mean, sure, I could have just been like, no, I could have just done that. But it's like, why? Why am I giving this? I'm giving this gold. I'm going to like dig in there.
The first thing that hits me when you're talking about writing tension, that it comes from like a lifelong habit of being a smartass and spending a lot of time trying not to say the thing that you know is going to get you in trouble. I've gotten better at it.
Set that free, baby. Set it free.
They know.
Sometimes you have to get okay. Yeah, say the thing. Just say that, you know.
I would say this is such a silly thing, but I'll tell you anyway. It's television, and it's an interesting thing to me about power. When I was a staff writer, non-VCR, I tell you, nobody listens to staff writers. Nope. And I was a staff writer, and nobody listened to me. And now I'm, showrunner and all this, I'm much more comfortable. And I'm like, boy, have I matured? And I'm like, it's not so much that I've matured as I have power. I'm able to talk and you can't cut me off. I'm able to talk and you actually have to listen to me. That's why, if I'm less stressed of not clenching my jaw as much, is because I suddenly am at liberty to say what I want. So that's been the difference. I don't know that I actually became wiser.
I have a question for you though.
Sure. Because
your way of writing words together, wow, that's just called writing. Your way of stringing adjectives together is so delicious inside of this book. How do you just find these words out of thin air? Like, I'm gonna give some examples.
Oh, sure. Oh my goodness.
There's one, bewitching and cocksure. I was like, oh my God, I think there's in one of the lessons you're like, my attitude is bewitching, and someone's attitude is bewitching and cocksure. And I was like, what a delicious way to describe that person. And you automatically know how that person looks, thinks, feels.
Well, what's funny is there's a lot of things I can't remember. That's Bill Buckley talking, right? And so
that's right. When they go through, that's right.
And Bill Buckley loves showing off his vocabulary. So like I knew if I'm in that voice, you figure out it was almost like translate. You figure out what he's got to say, and then you got to go back and Bill Buckley it. You got to go back and go, well, what's the fancy way of trying to say this because you're trying to show off that you went to private schools.
I see.
So that was a very specific character choice for that character.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it was fantastic, delicious.
But this is again, the difference between television writing and writing for a novel is in television writing, you actually don't have very much time to be poetic or to be very, nobody cares. Like it's stage direction. Really, it's instructions to the crew. They want to know what color the dress is. Or they want to know what room we're in. It's just, you're just blocking.
That's right.
So you don't get a chance to have any flourishes. So suddenly when you get somebody like Bill Buckley, who I can't stand, but he's fun to write. you get somebody, you get to really know, like, I'm going to get to go off on this flourish.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, I love, like, Dorothy Cotton is in this book and I adore her. And to kind of talk in that voice of, like, all the aunts I've ever loved, that was a joy, because those aren't characters I would normally get to write in television. So they don't normally make it into that there.
This is why we got to change the norm. So we're going to produce this as a limited series.
I would love to.
Let's keep it up to you, voice in the phone. I mean,
I'm represented at UTM. James Carter.
yeah, I mean, that's all I have for now.
All right, I think we're going to turn over to questions in the room. If people have questions for Jelani. I mean, by the way, this has been my favorite session. I'm just so relaxed. Yes.
Thank you, both of you. It was very educational for me to listen to both of you. You write the different characters. Do you have the different voices in your head when you write them down? Or are you mostly thinking about the words alone?
I'm thinking a lot about the characters and try to, I mean, if I knew a section was coming up, it's weird. Like, I might be writing something where Bayard Rustin is front and center, but I know Dorothy Cotton is coming. It's what you were saying about prep work. Even though I'm writing about Bayard, I'm probably listening to Dorothy, so that's getting under my skin, so that when I get there, it's accessible and I can go. So my prep work is probably what's coming up next, and then I sort of turn that off and do what's in front of me.
All right, and then I'll follow up with you. When you're an actor on stage, and now acting to me is a mystery. I don't know how you guys do
It's still a
it.
mystery to me too.
But when you are doing a play, you have one character thinking about one voice, but you don't have one voice. You have 5 voices in a room, certainly. How do you figure that all out? And then I think about, if you do a female voice, how much do you lift the pitch, or do you stay in the male sound, or how do you work that out?
You know, that was something I had to learn on the fly. This was the second audiobook I ever recorded in my whole life. And so on the fly, I had to learn, am I going to make the choice? Am I going to talk like I'm here? Am I actually going to do that? And the choice is yes. The answer is yes, because you actually have to have a discrepancy between the characters for someone to follow this and to understand what's happening. Tone was really important to me on this piece. There are some lessons that are like fun, and there are some parts of the book that are fun and party and hip and sexual. Like, I had to really understand the tone of each paragraph of this book. And in breaking that down, I was able to say, okay, the tone is, for example, let me pull out a character out of the book out of my head. Let's say it's Eduardo, right? I don't know. Eduardo's a character, yes? Yes. Eduardo is he's at the event, right, where the tone right there is very serious. Like, you have this militant woman who's coming in to kind of like train these volunteers to be resistant to police brutality. But yet Eduardo is in there flirting with Peter, right? And so I have to find a way to make sure Eduardo's tone is he's sexy, right? He's still in it's not a caricature of that. It's still in a serious place where I need to get to the point that this is a very serious thing happening. And so the tone of that shifts how I build the character. And that was fun for me. That was fun in the booth to be like, stop, go back. I don't like that. Let me go find something else. I'd be like, delete, like quite literally say, stop. This is not working. Let me go back and retune the voice to find the true voice of this person.
Well, the thing is, like you're saying, like, you have to, once you do make a choice, you have to carry it for hours.
Hours.
Like, you have to live with this.
And then if the character pops back in the book, you have to be like, find that again. Yeah. And once you start on this train, it's a freight train. It just goes and goes and goes.
Do you sometimes go back and listen to the tape to recollect?
That's correct. That's correct. And so halfway through, we kind of like made markers, like, this is fired. So let's go back and listen to him again. Let me listen. Got it. I'm into where I'm at. Yeah.
I think I saw another question. Yes.
Hi. I love this book so much, I can't even tell you how much. But I just devoured it. I love that you don't know what parts are documented history and what parts are not. You know, throughout the book, I'm like, what? But especially the scene with Dorothy Cotton and preparing for Police Charlie. Where did that scene come from? Not necessarily even did it come from the truth or not, but what inspired that scene?
Well, I love Dorothy Cotton. And she had done that work. Now when they normally talk about her, they talk about her in terms of her like education. And they would talk about, you know, teaching people what their voting rights were, how to register to vote, how to exercise them. But this particular work of preparing people for nonviolent protests where they knew they were going to be attacked was something that she did. And she even taught it to children, which is really just phenomenal and amazing to me. And so that's why I thought, if you're going to have somebody come in here and show them, let's go get the best. And so, you know, it's one of these things like, well, Dorothy was in Ithaca. I mean, you try to figure out where was she? She was in Ithaca, New York at the time. Well, let's bring her down on the train. You know, it became that sort of thing. But I wanted her because I wanted to really spell out what that would take, what you're asking people to do. The story about her father being abusive was a true story. My extrapolation is my own, but I went to go get her because she really did fit the bill for the scene. Yes.
All right. So again, sharing sentiments. Love the book. Loved it. Bought it on Amazon. Read it. I was like, I gotta listen to the audio. So I probably listened to the audiobook twice now. But really love the voice of that. But what I wanted to mention is how, as you all know, we all know there's enough, well, not enough, but some information about James Baldwin and his inclusion or lack thereof of like the movements that took place. And that's something that this book really spoke on. Even down to calling Jimmy and things like that, which I really love. I want to know what angle you were going in with that, and also like how did you feel when reading it? I was like, oh shit, whenever I read it. So I just wanted to hear like your thoughts on it.
Well, like a lot of things that I end up doing, my first feeling was fear. You know, James Baldwin is a giant in our world, and we all pay him respect as we should. I was my editor was here because I was scared about this, right? Because I wanted to point out that what tends to happen after people die is we sort of put them in the gay rights pantheon, even though during their own life, they didn't embrace or contribute much to the movement publicly. But I also, as I told Najee, I didn't want to go around and like, God, you don't want to write an entire book and have to go explain to everybody, why are you attacking James Baldwin? That's not what I'm doing. What I actually wanted, the point I wanted to make, and my POV into it was, even someone as intelligent and strong and brave as James Baldwin felt that if you were Black and queer, you had to make a choice, that you could not actually be accepted in both those movements. And Bayard Rustin being a living example of somebody who, once his homosexuality became problematic, was asked to step away from the civil rights movement. I mention that because I think sometimes when we look back at the past and people were closeted or people didn't behave as bravely as we wanted, we're not fully aware of all the pressure being brought to bear on those people. It is not that everyone who lived in the past was a coward. Right. Their government was that oppressive, that they were making the best decisions they could make. So that's really like the larger point of it. Trey, of course, being young, I don't think appreciates that yet. Right. But I'm trying to raise Trey's concern and then have Bayard speak to how I feel. Maybe you could be a little bit more compassionate in your view of the past.
That recording that section where Trey goes to his house, and Bayard really explodes for the first time in the book. For me, it was also my due diligence to understand the viewpoints that these humans are coming from, and that they are literally living in two different generations. Their minds have been Trey's mind is growing and expanding, but Bayard's has been frozen in a time when this was his experience. This is the box that he was forced to live in. Whereas Trey is like, well, now it's all about breaking the box, right? Like I think that the line that stuck to me when Trey says, I simply nodded and walked out, or you something like that, where after he said, like, graciously, I was like, okay, thank you for your advice. And Trey goes through this realization that he's living in a new time, or Bayard is stuck in his old time. I think as it was important that I gave Bayard the justification of what it was like to live at an intersection where it was simply dead ends. Right now, these roads move. Right now, we have the intersection of Black and queer, and now there's more and more and more. But there was a dead end when you came to the intersection during that time. It's also something I explored during Fellow Travelers, my character as well. It really goes through this dead end, and so that we have to understand that. Then you have to understand the listeners now listening to this story are of the Gen Z generation, where I'm going to happily be who I am and be accepted and be loved. So then there's now a complication of like, well, how's the listener going to receive this? How am I delivering it? And what's the actual truth? Right. And so I have to now balance all three of these things in the work of bringing this to voice to life, so that you walk away from it being like, oh, I didn't place judgment on these characters. I simply allowed them to exist. And the reader and or listener is going to have to make a choice of how they feel about this, how they feel about this movement, how they feel about the intersection of Black and queerness.
I'll point this. I mean, I'm getting old enough that I should be able to experience generational change everywhere I go. But really, this parenting taught me this, which is sometimes you're doing something for your kid and you want to explain to them, do you know what this costs me? Do you know what I had to do to line all this up so you could have X, Y, Z? And you look at their little face and you realize they don't care. They would never understand. Even if you told them, they wouldn't. They just can't appreciate that. And it's not their job to. Your job was to provide them with something. It is not their job to be endlessly grateful to you for having provided it. And I think that's sort of what I was trying to fight with there, because I think Trey can't appreciate fully everything, all the sacrifices that have been made before him at that point in the book. And I think Bayard is probably looking for a little gratitude, which he ain't gonna get either.
That's right.
But that's the sort of the crux of it, like you want people to notice your sacrifice. And in truth, if what you've done has really been successful, they won't even see it. Like they'll just assume that I belong at this table and I should sit here. My kids have such confidence. They just assume like there's no, well, of course I would be able to do this, that, and the other. As it should be. But that's a really hard thing to watch, even when you're happy, you're like, oh, really? I was telling my husband is here, and I was telling him on Bel Air, all these young Black straight boys started wearing like pearl necklaces, and like they were wearing pink and I'm like happy that I'm so happy the straight boys can like have more fashion and style, but it just blows my mind because I was like, I remember people yelling at me. I would dress so femme in DuPont Circle, which was known as the Fruit Loop in DC. Homosexuals would yell at me for dressing too femme. So I'm like, oh, okay. It's nice that I'm glad everybody's got a little more freedom now. But it's not like I can expect those straight boys with the pearl necklace to thank me. My fashion bravery all those years ago.
Lastly, I want to thank you for humanizing Bayard Rustin for me, because he was always just this activist, the little bit they do share with us about what he's done. I'm like, gosh, it's just this pillar. And then he's in a bathhouse in your book. I'm like, wait, what?
Yes.
And I think James Baldwin always has humanized himself, so we didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
I like that you took the road less traveled with him, and I appreciate that so much.
Thank you.
There's a lot about this book that's under the cloak of darkness that I really found appetizing as a reader, and for a creator or part of creating something from this book. The cloak of taking light away and allowing how do people experience each other when they're inside darkness was really something beautiful that I actually remember turning off the lights many times when I was reading, because I was reading from an iPad. And so I was like, let's just turn on the lights so I can really feel this idea that it's 1 a.m. and we're in a bathhouse. How do we communicate? How does it actually happen? You know?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, like, what's great about that bathhouse space to me is suddenly the status you might carry and throw around out in the world, that's not going to help you here.
Right.
You know?
You're literally stripped.
Yeah, it's all you left it. You left it in your room, left it at the locker. Let's see how else. And people will show you a side of themselves that may be quite different than their job. Like, I mean, you know, one of the writers I've worked with on 2 shows, Navi is here, and she's seen me not be in charge and she's seen me be in charge. I'm not all that in love with being the boss. You know, I mean, it's just not really speaking to me on a daily basis, but I can do it and I can do it effectively. But I don't confuse that with my personality. I think a lot of people do confuse their status with their personality. And so it's nice to put them in a space where they've got to become someone else. Because that title isn't gonna, you're not gonna be able to carry that either. No, not here.
Right.
It's a question way in the back.
Thank you for this event. My question is more about how the book is structured, like the chapters or the lesson. And to me, that's interesting because I think most stories are trying to offer some kind of lesson to the audience. So could you kind of talk about how structuring the book based off of these lessons maybe shifted how you told the story? And maybe a follow-up question is, what was, from your perspective, the hardest lesson in the main character?
The first one, why I structured it this way is it gave me more freedom. You know, the protagonist, my character in my book, is like 17 years old when we meet him. He's 19 when he's gone. I do not want to disparage people that young, but you don't have the benefit of hindsight on what you're doing. So if I had been locked into that voice, there's a lot of perspective I couldn't give it. So I knew it had to be sort of a memoir. It had to be him looking back at this age. So then you're sort of doing a memoir and you're sort of doing lessons, and this is such a, like, I think it works for the book, but also it worked for my lifestyle. I was writing this with 2 small children, working in television during the pandemic. If I made it a lesson, if I made this sort of episodic, I wouldn't lose my place if my life took me away from it for 2 weeks and then I had to come back and write it again. You know, that I look at a chapter and go, well, this is the chapter we're going to figure out where he's going to live. This is the chapter where he's going to get a job. You can go away from that, come back and be like, where was it? Oh, okay, got it. And it made it a manageable thing for me to hold. And then also as you're writing it and you would see a lesson or you would see something sort of revealing itself, because it's not like I knew any of this at the top. I never really started with, here's the lesson of this chapter. Like, you'd write the chapter and then go, what the hell was this about? And then go back and try to, like, you know, strengthen it so it fit that one. I think the lesson that was probably hardest for him, which is also saying it's been the hardest for me, is what happens when you realize that your political mentors or heroes have been fighting with each other sometimes for decades before you got there. That you were walking in, that they've been having an interpersonal relationship that goes way, way, way back. The details, well, I'll give you this example that I don't expect anybody to follow this. I worked at a place called the Coalition for Juvenile Justice when I was in college. And it was run by people who had come from the Brady Foundation, gun violence. They had broken off this and this. And you would go to one of, like, the conference and, like, people wouldn't talk to each other and hadn't been talking to. And this is like the most liberal DC feel-good group you'd ever. Everybody there could have been Mr. Rogers. And they wanted to knife each other at these events. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? And I wanted that flavor. There's a world in which you could have done this book and it would have been like all the queer people against the mean Republicans and Reaganites. We know they're out there, and that book has been written. I want to talk about what happens when we get together and we're going to decide we're going to do something and we just take it out on each other. So it's that thing, and I'm going to make this comparison, and God, just know in my heart, I know I'm not on her level. Okay, just know that. Toni Morris. Okay. But this feeling Toni Morris was like, I can write a book about Black people and white people. They're out there, but they don't need to be in the heart of it. I felt that way about the LGBTQ+ community. I could tell a story that did not rely on straight people to sort of like walk into our narrative and walk into our world. We have drama and there's enough here that we can do a book.
Kind of a follow-up. I was thinking about the movie Finding Foster, where Sean Connery tells the young guy, just write and go on writing, and then the kids start to write and say faster. How's your process when you write? Do you just write everything down and then later on you go in and fix it? Or do you think a lot about it before you get it down?
With this, I had to change the way, because I've worked in television for 15 years, I really had to rewire my brain. Because in television, you don't get to indulge yourself. This scene needs to be about a page and a half. And if you thought, I mean, there are times you have a nice little clever tangent, you got to kill it because we don't have time for your clever tangent. And also I'm thinking about, even as I'm writing the script, the notes from the studio, the notes from the network, like there's all these filters and I have no time. Like I have sometimes gone upstairs to my office and I was like, we are coming down with a full episode. Like it's going to happen tonight. Whereas with this, it was nice because I was like, I was writing this book on spec. So like I could remind myself, the world is not waiting for this book. You have no deadline. You can write this as openly as you want. And what it actually did was I probably wrote more and I wrote more quickly because I was like, well, let's just see what happens. And you can always take it out. You can always change it later. And you can't really embarrass yourself because nobody knows you're doing it. So it was very freeing. And when I was able to dedicate time to it, because there was, I read books now about like novelists from the 70s. Like I love Kurt Vonnegut. And there's stories where Kurt Vonnegut would go in his office and the kids knew not to even make daddy's in his office. We don't make noise while daddy's in his office. My kid, that's just not happening. Want them to. I don't want, I want that. So the writing had to happen around the life and not the other way around. And so there would be times where I would be absolutely pulled away from it. And that was okay. And then when I came back, though, I found I've been thinking a lot about it, and I could get a lot done.
Thank you.
One of my favorite lessons is touch at least one dead body. I think there's something about that lesson that awakened Trey to the realities of being Black and queer and what the cost of that is, or what the cost of just human existence really is. One of the really beautiful moments that I love recording is when he left that body on the park bench, but then he kissed it. And then he it was almost like a giving him his own burial. And I remember reading that being like, oh, this character is now understanding the value of human life, which is something so lost on society today. And it was really, really, for me, a lesson that touched me deeply.
Well, it's also something that's lost on people who are even in advocacy work or policy work. There's I'm not saying this person is Angie, but there was this woman I knew who I really loved, Karen Washington, who'd been a Black Panther, and she was at the National Crime Prevention Council, and I just adored her. And she would talk about policymakers, and one of her put downs would be like, I bet he don't even make nobody a sandwich. Like, you can be talking about getting people these rights and all this sort of stuff. Do you have direct contact with people in need? Do you touch the bodies? Do you see the people? Or is it all just sort of
idea, philosophy, politics?
Right. Numbers, a game, a
yeah.
play, a bill. And I was trying, what you're seeing between Angie and Bayer and Peter, like I think Trey's trying to figure out where he's going to be in this. Am I going to be a policy person? Am I going to be direct service? Am I going to be both? How do you balance that out? And I think trying to give him experiences where he was face to face with it. I had, as growing up, when I grew up, AIDS was like, I mean, we were just scared shitless. Everybody, I believe that was the lesson plan. It was called Scare the Children Shitless. And so we were, but it wasn't until I started volunteering at this group home called Grandma's House in DC, which was for kids who were HIV positive, had AIDS. And then I was like, oh, I'm seeing this.
Mm.
Like that's a very different thing when you're actually seeing people.
Mm.
So I wanted that. That was really important for me to like ground that into the book.
It was the turning point. It is the turning.
Yeah.
He's never the same.
Well, it went from being something he heard about to being like, oh, this is now something
I'm holding.
I'm carrying.
I'm carrying on my shoulders. Yeah.
I also want to point out that, okay, so I'm a gay male from the South. And so reading his story, and I just recently moved here, and this was my intro to New York. And so I'm starting looking at these places that don't exist. But I didn't know. So I don't know that until afterwards. And you said you automatically think it's a memoir, so I'm like, so now I just want to create these places. But nonetheless, the story spoke so much to my childhood, my upbringing, my life, that it's a lesson. All the chapters are lessons, but the book in itself is a lesson for people who don't directly live in that intersection. So one thing I think that we should all embody every character from reading it, which is something I try to do so I can see how it felt to be this person, that person, because every character is extremely different. Although they do have so many things alike, like they're same gender loving, or a lot of them are Black males, their experiences are so different. So it eliminates that categorizing that we do of one another. So that's something that I really appreciate about the book. So that I would challenge anyone reading the book to do, just put yourself in the character's shoes so that you can kind of have that lived experience for once in a life. You're hearing it from an expert in those shoes.
Well, I mean, that idea of like trying to get as many stories in as possible was also probably with a goal of mine. This is just a weird thing about me. I love reading obituaries. I love reading them so much that my husband got me for Christmas, like the New York Times Book of the Dead, which is like a collection of like some of their more prominent big obituaries. And I was like, this is the best gift. I'm crying. You know me so well. And without being too formulaic, but like what ended up happening is like you're bringing in a lot of people, and whether it's a footnote where you have like 2 or 3 sentences, or them in passing, these mini obits where you're trying to get everybody their story and their moment to be like, I come from a very specific place and I just want to be heard. That was something the book could do. Yes.
That segues into the question that I was going to ask about, just to talk about the footnotes. Very interested in like the length of the footnotes.
Mhm.
It's probably longer than a lot of in fiction books, a lot of footnoting. So can you talk, but in a really fun way, like they were in, like the footnotes themselves were like mini stories or maybe mini.
Well, I'll tell you, this is the foot. Oh my goodness, yeah, there were so many footnotes. But the way I try to look at the footnotes, and this is the weirdest comparison because this person again is not like going to have a lot of fans in this room. The official biography of Margaret Thatcher. If you read it as I did, all the footnotes are about people. And they told you when they were born or died, but it was through the lens of their relationship with Margaret Thatcher. Every footnote was about, were they a favorite? Were they not a favorite? Did they fall out? Did she bring them into her cabinet? That sort of thing. And so I was like, every footnote here needs to be through this really queer lens. Mm-hmm. So even if I'm telling you about Lena Horne, who, what could be written about her, what I want to tell you is, that I found fascinating, is that the man she thought was the most ideal, the one who loved her the most, who she loved the most, happened to be a gay man who had no sexual interest in her at all. That's what I wanted to do with those footnotes. There was sort of like, I think there were some footnotes I had in that I want to say my editor, Najee, was like, let's pull these back. And then there were some that was like, let's play with these, or let's put more, or let's figure it out. So it was sort of like a balancing act, because you want it to help the narrative, but you don't, it could completely become a gimmick and too overwhelming. So that was sort of like the line we're trying to walk. I also liked it because it just sort of, in the, books or novels are kind of great because they tell you they're alive, but they got to try to make you feel like it's real. And just because you were reading it and you saw footnotes, they add credit. They make it like academic. You're like, well, this must be real. It has footnotes.
Right.
So they also serve that purpose.
If they had humor. How are they treated in the audiobook?
They were not, I mean, that was the first thing I asked. I said, are we going to record the footnotes? They're like, no. I was like, I didn't.
Because there's no way to do it without breaking the narrative.
Without breaking the rhythm of the story. So I was glad that they're their own separate thing. They live in their own separate world. And they're actually meant to be not spoken, right? They're actually meant to be read and then researched and or become curious about, you know what I mean? They are in their own, it's a dictionary. I saw it as a dictionary.
It was also like, I mean, the thing I'm fighting against is I have two Black gay men in the 80s, and one of them says to another, did you hear Luther's new album? And the other one would just be, yeah, they don't need, no one would be like, oh, Luther Vandross,
Right.
R&B singer, like they would know. So they're never gonna, in trying to slide that in would sort of clog up the prose. So you put a footnote, you put it at the bottom and people need it. So like not only are they not supposed to be read out loud, but for a lot of people, you may not need them. Like you know who Luther is, you just keep going. You don't need this you don't need to read this footnote at all. It was like there for people who, because of age or race or sexuality, may not be able to catch all the references. And I didn't want to slow the whole class down. Like you could stay after class, read these footnotes, but the rest of the word keep going. Because nothing makes me, Jonathan knows, nothing makes me madder than when I'm watching something and I think it's for me. And then it starts telling me things. I'm like, I already know. Why are you telling me? Oh, this is for the wide audience. This isn't really for me. You're reaching past me to get them. Got it. That I can't stand. Yes.
How did the other the other fiction you've written prepare you for this project?
You know, you don't want to think you're practicing because everything you're writing, you're like, well, this is going to sell and this is going to go. And so I had written other novels. I thought like, oh, they're going to, and it just didn't happen. So Trey as a character comes from another book I wrote years before. He was like part of a family and he was in the family and he was sent out, he went away. He did this in that book. And so when I decided to do this book, it was actually very helpful because I knew his entire backstory. I knew what had happened to his brother. I knew why he was there. I mean, like, you know, I don't necessarily suggest you write an entire book that goes unpublished so you can own the backstory of your main character, but it turns out that's what I did. Yes, there you go.
Let's make this the last question.
Yeah.
Are you planning a lot more books?
Oh yeah. Oh my God. My big career. I can't wait. No, and I love this idea of like historical fiction and just going back through it and just like making it Black and making it gay and say, oh, maybe you never thought of it like this.
Amen.
Yeah. You can buy it on the Bureau's online store, or you can buy it right here, right? Thank you guys so much. Rasheed, I'm guessing you'd be happy to sign.
Yes, yeah.
Jelani, I just have to say, I've read this a million times audio. Like I've been to a million channel events. It's just the best one. Can I say, like, when I know